A fresh $21 million win, I rushed to my daughter's, overflowing with joy to share. But at her doorstep, her voice reached me. Increase the dose by Christmas and she won't even remember who I am. I didn't knock. I drove home and started the silent game. You know, there are moments in life that shatter everything you thought you knew. For me, it happened the day I won $21 million. I was holding that envelope, my heart buzzing with excitement, ready to surprise my daughter. But as I stood outside her front door, a voice sliced through the air, her voice calmly saying, "If we up her dosage slowly, she'll forget who she is by Christmas." My knees buckled. My heart didn't just break. It completely crumbled into dust. I didn't knock. I just turned around, drove home in a daze, and by that night, I had hidden cameras installed in every corner of my house. It all started so innocently. That envelope. $21 million! It felt like a dream. I wasn't going to give it all to her, of course not. Just a little something. Help with the mortgage, fix up their kitchen, maybe set up a fund for my granddaughter Emily. That was the plan. A wonderful surprise. But life has a way of twisting surprises into nightmares. Their voices so clear through that door. First, Jake, my son-in-law, calm and chillingly calculated. If we up her dosage slowly, by Christmas, she won't remember who she is. And then my daughter. My own flesh and blood. She won't fight back, she said, her voice dismissive, cold. She's soft now. This is the only way. Something inside me didn't just break. It tore, clean and sharp. There was nothing left to fix. I didn't knock. I just drove home. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just moved, mechanically. That night, 2 things were delivered. A bottle of whiskey I had no intention of drinking, and a set of hidden cameras I fully intended to use. I installed them myself, one in the kitchen, one by the front door, another tucked into the molding above the medicine cabinet. I tested every angle, every shadow, every sound. They say when you grow old, you become invisible. Maybe that's true. But invisibility, I quickly realized, has its uses. 3 nights later, they came. Nora, my daughter, brought a casserole. Jake brought a smile, the kind that never quite reaches the eyes. They acted like everything was normal. Small talk, compliments. Emily wasn't with them. Of course not. She still had a soul. Jake even offered to help clean up the kitchen after dinner, something he'd never done before. While I was rinsing dishes, I saw him. A quick glance at the cabinet, a pause. A hand in his pocket, a second too long. He left a new bottle of pills right where the old one used to be. I didn't touch it. That night, I swapped the capsules, leaving their poison in a Ziploc under the sink. The next morning, I started the show. I forgot the sugar in my coffee. I called Emily by the cat's name. I stared blankly at the TV, even though it wasn't on. They came back, this time with papers. Jake said they were routine. Nora, ever so sweet, claimed they'd help take the burden off my shoulders. I smiled, nodded, and told them I'd take a look. I waited. 4 days later, they returned. This time, no smiles. Nora slapped the papers in front of me like she was dealing a losing hand. The top page read, Long-Term Care Authorization. The second, Property Transfer. I blinked at the lines, pretending not to understand. I asked where Emily was. I asked what day it was. Jake's hand slammed on the table. Nora hissed something I couldn't even process. Then suddenly her hand was across my cheek, sharp, hot. Before I could even catch my breath, Jake grabbed my shoulder and shoved. My back hit the chair hard, pain shooting up my spine. My hands trembled. I looked up, and just like that, the front door burst open. Officer Grant, Laura. She used to take piano lessons from me when she was 12. Now she had a badge, a gun, and a face that said she'd seen enough. She didn't hesitate. Step away from her. Nora went pale. Jake raised his hands, and I just sat there calm, watching. For those of you still listening, still following this story, sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. And I had been preparing for this moment since the day I didn't knock. They thought it was over. But that was only the first step. After the police left, after Nora and Jake were gone, and the front door was finally closed again, I didn't collapse. I didn't cry. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My cheek still burned. My shoulder ached where I'd hit the chair. But I stood tall. Because now the game had shifted. I didn't just want to defend myself. I wanted them exposed. I knew the slap and shove would trigger consequences, but that was just emotion. Heat. I needed proof that what they had planned went far beyond one bad evening. I needed to uncover everything they were hiding. So I got to work. I called Martha first. She's been my friend for over 30 years. We met at the public library when I was working part-time, and she was organizing a grief support group after losing her husband. Martha has the kind of mind that remembers everything, especially people. She's slow to judge and quick to notice. And she never liked Jake. I didn't tell her everything, not in full. I only said I had a situation and needed help reviewing something. Martha showed up 2 hours later with her reading glasses and a yellow notepad. I pulled out the folder Nora had left behind. She'd been too confident to think I'd actually read it. That arrogance, I realized, was going to be her undoing. Page after page of dense legal language filled with phrases like durable medical proxy and permanent residence waiver. There was even a draft of a power of attorney I'd never signed, but somehow my signature was scanned into it. Martha caught that instantly. She tapped her pen on the corner of the page. "Harriet," she said, "this isn't just pressure. This is premeditated. We read through everything twice." Martha took photos of the documents with her phone, then helped me separate what was suspicious and what could be useful later. I didn't need to understand every legal term. I just needed to build a chain: intent, motive, method. Then came the banking records. I'd never shared full access to my accounts with Nora, but she'd helped me set up online banking years ago, and I'd let her have my passwords when I broke my wrist. I'd change them later, of course, or so I thought. When I logged in, things looked fine at first. Usual balances, scheduled bill payments. But then I checked the recent login activity. 3 access attempts in the past week from an unfamiliar device. One came from Jake's work IP address. I contacted the bank's fraud department and requested a security report. They confirmed that my account had been viewed multiple times. No money was taken yet, but the pattern was clear. I printed the records, highlighted every access, made copies, organized everything in a binder, page by page. I wasn't angry. I was methodical. Over the next 3 days, I dug through everything. My insurance policies, the deed to the house, the folder where I kept old letters from my husband. I looked for fingerprints, traces, anything that showed how long this had been building. And I found it, buried in the back of my filing cabinet, in a folder labeled Miscellaneous. A typed document dated 6 months ago. It was a long-term care evaluation form, filled out, signed not by me. It listed my name, my birth date, medical notes I'd never heard of, memory concerns, delayed response, inconsistent hygiene. All made up. And signed by a physician I'd never met. I closed the folder and sat still for a long, long time. They'd been planning this long before the lottery win. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about erasing me, making me into a version of myself that was small and manageable, a woman no one would believe, an old lady they could shut away. I made 3 phone calls. First, to Detective Grant. I told her I had more information, and she said she'd come by the next morning. Second, I called Emily's school and left a message for the guidance counselor just to check in, just to make sure my granddaughter was safe and not caught in the middle of this escalating nightmare. Third, I called an estate lawyer, one with a reputation. I booked a meeting under my maiden name. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and watched the footage again. Jake reaching into his pocket, swapping the bottles. Nora watching from the hallway, pretending not to see. Me sipping water, buying time. I played it twice. Not because I needed proof, but to remind myself that I hadn't imagined it, that the danger was real, that I was right to act. By morning, the pain in my shoulder had started to settle. I brewed coffee, dressed in navy slacks and a blouse with buttons that took too long to fasten. I pinned my hair back and put on my late husband's watch. It still ticked, steady and quiet. I sat by the window and waited for the next knock on the door. Because this time I would be ready. Detective Grant arrived just after 9. She wore plain slacks and a gray blouse, no badge in sight, carrying a thin black folder under one arm. Her eyes scanned my front porch like it might have changed since her last visit. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. I led her straight to the kitchen where I'd laid out the new evidence in quiet order, the forged care documents, the login records from my bank account, the video files backed up on a flash drive labeled by date and timestamp. She sat across from me at the table and opened her folder, but didn't take out a single sheet of paper. She just listened. When I finished walking her through the sequence, she finally spoke. Her voice was low, steady. This isn't just about family, Harriet. This is fraud, identity tampering, possibly conspiracy to defraud a senior citizen. She didn't need to elaborate. Her face told me she had seen this before. Maybe not with this much precision or with this many moving parts, but the core of it was sickeningly familiar. She asked, "Keep copies of everything." I gave her the binder, the flash drive, the printed logs. She promised me she'd loop in a financial crimes officer and start a formal review. She didn't give me a timeline. I didn't ask for one. After she left, I sat in the silence of the kitchen. The air still carried a trace of her scent, clean wool and paper. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tapping of tree branches against the living room window. I allowed myself 5 minutes to just sit. Nothing more. Then I stood and walked back to my bedroom closet. The safe was behind the coats. Inside were 2 things I hadn't touched in a long time: the original deed to the house, in my name only, and a sealed envelope from the State Lottery Commission, dated 4 weeks ago. I held both items for a moment before slipping them into my purse. I drove to my lawyer's office, a red brick building near the edge of downtown, tucked between a dentist and a florist. The parking lot was empty except for one silver sedan. I sat in the car for a moment, steadying my breath before walking inside. His name was David Kessler. He'd handled my husband's will years ago and remembered me by my voice when I called. He greeted me in the waiting room with a nod and motioned toward his office. No receptionist, no small talk. I liked that. Once the door was shut, I took out the deed and the lottery envelope and placed them in front of him. He opened the letter first, scanned the paper inside, and raised an eyebrow. I watched his eyes move across the numbers. Then I watched the silence settle in as he absorbed what I told him next. Not just the lottery, not just the betrayal, but the forged papers, the login attempts, the physical aggression. He said nothing for a long time. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled. This changes everything. I didn't ask for details. I simply told him what I wanted: a new will, a full asset protection review, an immediate revision of my medical proxy, removal of Nora's name from everything she ever touched. I wanted layers, walls, traps. If they tried again, even indirectly, they would trip every wire I built. David didn't flinch. He started drafting the paperwork the same afternoon. That evening, I cooked myself a full dinner for the first time in weeks. Grilled salmon, roasted asparagus, a glass of white wine I'd been saving since Christmas. I ate slowly, watching the streetlight flicker across the driveway, thinking about how carefully Nora had planned it all. They didn't want to hurt me for sport. They wanted the structure, the control. They didn't want the money to spend. They wanted it to secure a life where I didn't exist. And that, more than the violence, was what I couldn't forgive. I called Martha just before 10. I told her I needed her to witness a signing in 2 days. She didn't ask what for. She just said she'd bring lemon bars. The next day, I drove out to the edge of town. There's a retirement community there, not the kind with linoleum floors and peeling paint, but the new kind, the luxury kind. Quiet buildings wrapped around courtyards, the smell of lavender and lemon balm in the air, a small cafe with a fireplace in the corner. I walked the halls alone, introducing myself as a potential volunteer, a music teacher, a neighbor, a friend. I met 3 women in the reading room who looked exactly like me, only a few years ahead. Sharp minds, clear eyes, empty chairs beside them. I sat down with them for 15 minutes, listened to their stories, their routines, their disappointments. They had been someone's mother, too. Someone's wife. Someone's bank account. I smiled. I thanked them. I left. On the way home, I took the long route, the one that passed Jake's office. The lights were off. The lot was empty, but his name was still painted on the front window. I parked across the street and stared at it for a few minutes. Not with hatred, just calculation. Back home, I filed the draft will David had sent. I reviewed the security footage again, just once. Then I set up a new backup system and emailed copies of everything to a storage drive under a new name. I was no longer planning defense. This was an offense. By the end of that week, the foundation was laid. New legal structures. A firewall between me and every one of their schemes. But I wasn't done. I wrote a letter, a short one, printed it, sealed it, addressed it to an attorney I hadn't seen in 15 years, a woman named Judith who specialized in elder abuse litigation. Not because I needed her now, but because I might. Then I went outside and watered the plants. The wind was cool and the sky was dark with a low hum of summer thunder in the distance. Everything smelled like soil and freshly cut grass. Inside, the cameras kept rolling. The footage kept building. My strength kept growing, because they had touched the wrong woman. And I had only just begun. The outer layer of my defense was sealed. The legal protections were in place. The camera system had recorded enough to speak for itself if I ever lost my voice. But defense wasn't enough anymore. I didn't want to wait for them to strike again. I was done being the hunted. I had the evidence. Now I needed to turn the weight of it against them. The first step wasn't loud. It was a name on an envelope. I mailed 3 certified packages to 3 separate people. One to the state's Adult Protective Services Office, one to the Ethics Committee at Jake's engineering firm, and one to the managing partner of the law firm where Nora used to clerk, a place that prided itself on legacy and reputation. Each envelope contained the same thing: a thumb drive with clips from the video footage, scans of the forged documents, and a short, calm letter with dates, times, and facts. No accusations, no threats. Just the truth delivered cold. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. The point wasn't conversation. The point was consequence. Next, I booked a quiet lunch at the country club where Nora had been desperately trying to claw her way into the social circle. I reserved a table under my maiden name and arrived early, wearing the brooch my husband had given me the day we paid off the house. I didn't invite anyone, but I made sure the lunch coordinator, the same woman who handled their gala committees, saw me come in and sit down alone. I ordered the trout, tipped in cash, and said I was reviewing catering options for a community fundraiser. Then I left my business card behind, one I'd had printed the day before. It listed only my name and the phrase, Community Advocate, Bloom Foundation. No phone number, just a website. The website only had one page, a quiet mission statement, and a video link titled, When Family Fails You. The video was less than 4 minutes long. I never showed my face. It used subtitles over black and white security footage with soft piano music in the background. No narration, just visuals, a woman being handed a document, a man swapping bottles in a kitchen, a slap, a fall, a slow fade to the words, protect yourself before they rewrite your life. It wasn't just about me anymore. I knew that now. I met with Detective Grant again 2 days later. She had received confirmation from the district office. The investigation had been upgraded. Not just elder abuse. Now, it included forgery, misuse of protected medical information, and conspiracy to defraud. She asked me if I was willing to testify. I told her yes without blinking. That night, I slept with the window open. The air smelled like pine needles and distant rain. I woke once briefly and heard the wind chimes clinking on the porch. I listened, then fell back asleep. 2 mornings later, Jake lost his job. I didn't find out from him. I found out from Martha, who got a text from her nephew, who worked in the building next door to Jake's office. Apparently, there had been a meeting, a private one. Then he left the building without his security badge. It had only taken one look at the footage: the slap, the switch, the falsified document. The firm didn't want the liability, not with state investigators watching. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I watered my garden that morning like I always did. I trimmed the lavender bush and swept the walkway. But I did allow myself one small nod when I passed the mailbox. Nora held out longer. She had more insulation. She'd always been better at pretending, but the cracks started showing fast. Her name disappeared from the social calendar at the club. Her volunteer slot at the Historic Preservation Board was quietly reassigned. And when I walked past the boutique she used to visit, the manager didn't meet my eyes. I received a message through my lawyer the next day, from hers. She requested a private meeting. Not about custody, not about inheritance. About closure. I told David to decline politely. There would be no private meetings, no quiet arrangements. If she wanted to speak, she could do so under oath. The hardest part of those weeks wasn't the damage. It wasn't watching the reputation they'd built collapse under their own weight. It was knowing how easily I could have missed it. How close I'd come to being erased by the very people I had given my life to. It made me see everything differently. I cleaned out my attic that weekend, found old photo albums I hadn't touched in years, found letters from my late husband, birthday cards from when Emily was just a toddler. I boxed them carefully and moved them into the study, into the cabinet where I now kept my legal files and backup drives. The past and the future side by side. On Sunday, I made a small donation in Nora's name to the local women's shelter. Anonymous, just a check, no message. Not out of forgiveness. Not out of guilt. but because sometimes, even when people try to destroy you, you don't have to let them change who you are. I was Harriet Bloom, and I still was. And the storm I had unleashed was only just beginning. It didn't take long for the blowback to begin. When people start to fall, they rarely go quietly. And Nora was not one to go down without a struggle. 3 days after Jake lost his job, I noticed a car parked across the street from my house. Same make and model, different plates every day. No one ever got out. They never rang the bell. But the engine stayed running for hours, always facing the front window. Always around the same time Nora used to drop off baked goods like she was some saintly daughter. I didn't panic. I added one more angle to the security system and went about my day. But I knew it was her, or someone hired by her, watching, waiting, looking for weakness. That same week, a letter arrived in the mail. Not from her directly, of course. From a different law firm, one I didn't recognize. The tone was sharp, aggressive. It accused me of falsifying claims, manipulating video evidence, and damaging Nora and Jake's reputation with malicious intent. They threatened defamation suits, a formal countersuit for slander, and financial restitution. I handed the letter to David Kessler and made a pot of Earl Grey. He read it while I clipped basil from the garden. He looked up once, nodded, and said he'd handle it. He asked if I had updated backups of all the original files. I told him yes. 3 copies. One on a drive in my fireproof lockbox, one with Martha, one in a safety deposit box at the credit union. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and reread the original forged documents. Nora hadn't just tried to trick me. She had used legal formatting, my old signature from tax returns, even a mock notary stamp she must have lifted from some online template. She knew exactly what she was doing. And now that the law had seen the evidence, she was scrambling, throwing darts at the wall to see if anything would tear. Then came another call. A woman introduced herself as an investigator from the State Board for Medical Licensing. She had received a copy of the footage and was pursuing formal disciplinary review against the physician who had signed the initial elder care assessment that Nora used as justification to seize medical power of attorney. Apparently, he had signed off without ever meeting me in person. Never even called me. Just took Nora's word and rubber-stamped it. I thanked her, and after the call ended, I sat still for a long time. The doctor, a man I'd never seen, had come that close to declaring me legally incompetent. Had things gone just a little differently, I could have been locked away in a facility by now. Forgotten. Drifting. He was a stranger, but his carelessness nearly stole everything from me. And Nora knew it. She counted on it. I wrote his name down and filed it with the rest. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted a record, a full, clear map of how close I came to being erased. Later that week, Nora tried something bolder. I came home from the pharmacy to find my gate open. Nothing looked touched at first, but when I entered the kitchen, I noticed my spice drawer slightly ajar. One of the labels peeled. The white sticker on the jar of chamomile tea had a tiny fingerprint in ink, just visible when I held it against the light. I didn't drink the tea. I called Detective Grant instead. She arrived that evening with a quiet team. No lights, no sirens. They took samples, photographed the scene, asked if I'd eaten or drunk anything I hadn't prepared myself. I said no. She nodded and placed a small recorder on the counter, telling me to speak freely, just in case. I didn't feel afraid. I felt steel growing in my chest. 2 days later, she confirmed it. A sedative had been laced into the chamomile. Same compound they tried to switch my medication with. Same dosage. Same manufacturer. They hadn't given up. They had escalated. It was desperation, but desperation, I knew, makes people careless. On Saturday morning, I received a call from a woman named Deborah. She said she had seen the video. Her daughter forwarded it to her after it made its way through a private Facebook group for local caregivers. Deborah's own mother had lost her house 6 months earlier under similar circumstances. No footage, no proof, just paperwork and manipulation. She wanted to thank me, said she was speaking to a lawyer now. I hung up and stared out the window for a long time. Maybe what happened to me wasn't just about my family. Maybe it was something wider. A quiet epidemic, hiding behind polite dinners and fake smiles. And maybe exposing Nora would do more than just clear my name. Maybe it would protect someone else. The next week, I went to the courthouse. For financial exploitation. Attempted poisoning, fraud, conspiracy to commit identity theft. I didn't want money. I wanted the record, the declaration. I wanted it written in the public file that what they did was real, that I had not imagined it, that I had not exaggerated, that I mattered. That week, Nora's attorney dropped her. Jake's former employer released a public statement distancing themselves from any former employee involved in investigations of elder abuse. And a week later, the district attorney's office requested a meeting. They had questions. I had answers. It was a Monday morning when the official letter arrived. A summons. The state had decided to proceed with charges. Not just a civil case anymore. This was criminal court, formal, structured, and public. I read it in full before I placed it on the kitchen counter next to my folded dish towel. The light coming in through the blinds striped the page like prison bars. I thought about that for a long time. Later that afternoon, David called to confirm the schedule. I would give a statement. I would appear in court. But before any of that happened, there would be a recorded mediation. A chance, they said, for the parties to clarify intentions, to settle, to look one another in the eye. I agreed. Not because I believed Nora would apologize, but because I had one thing left to say. The meeting took place in a neutral building downtown. 3 floors up, in a gray room with no windows, just a round table, 2 chairs on each side, a camera in the corner, a pitcher of water no one touched. She walked in first, tailored jacket, hair pulled back tight, not a single wrinkle on her blouse. But I saw it right away, in the jaw, in the eyes. She looked brittle, like glass stretched too thin. One tap from the inside and she might shatter. Jake wasn't there. Her lawyer followed behind, tall and silent. Mine was already seated. I didn't stand. When she sat down across from me, our eyes met. She blinked first. The mediator introduced himself and laid out the rules. I barely heard him. My focus was on her hands. Perfect nails, one tapping a slow, nervous rhythm against the armrest. She used to tap like that during math tests as a girl. They asked me if I wanted to begin. I said yes. I told Nora I had raised her to be strong, that I had sacrificed more than she'd ever know to give her a safe, stable life. I told her I had never needed thanks, but I had expected decency. I told her the hardest part was not the betrayal, not the forged documents, not the fall in my kitchen, or the altered medicine. It was the fact that when she looked at me, she no longer saw a person, just a hurdle. An obstacle between her and a comfortable life. She didn't interrupt. She didn't speak at all. So I kept going. I told her I knew what fear was, that I had spent nights unable to sleep, wondering if the tea I drank would be the one to make me forget my own name, that I had counted pills, measured labels, checked locks twice. I told her I had never lived like that before. Not until her. When I finally stopped, the room was quiet. Even the mediator didn't move. Then her lawyer cleared his throat and said his client had prepared a statement. Nora reached into her folder and pulled out a piece of paper, but she didn't read from it. She just held it. She said she never wanted things to go this far, that Jake had pushed. That after her second miscarriage, she felt unmoored. That watching me live alone in that house, independent and proud, made her feel invisible, like her life had stalled while mine kept going. She said she didn't mean to hurt me, that she thought she was protecting me, that Jake told her no one would believe me anyway. I listened. I believed some of it, but not enough. When she stopped, she folded the paper and placed it back in her bag. She looked down. Not at the table, not at me, just down. I leaned forward and told her something I hadn't planned to say. That there had been a time, not long ago, when I had almost left everything to her. Not because she earned it, but because I thought love required sacrifice. That maybe giving her everything would heal whatever wound lived inside her. But then you tried to erase me, I said, my voice steady, and I would not give anything to someone who believed I was disposable. The mediator asked if we were willing to resolve the matter outside of court. David said no. Nora's lawyer didn't argue. When it was over, she stood slowly. I stayed seated. She walked to the door, hesitated, then turned to look back at me. She said my name just once, Harriet. And I said hers the way I used to, Nora Jean. Then she left. I sat in that room for another 10 minutes, listening to the air vent hum. Outside, the light had shifted, clouds moving in. I walked to my car alone and drove to the cemetery where my husband was buried. I didn't speak to the headstone. I just sat on the bench beside it and let the wind blow across my face. I had thought that facing her would bring me peace. But peace was not what I felt. It was something else, something quieter, like a deep shift inside my bones. The moment you stop fighting to be heard and start choosing who deserves to hear you. Back at home, the house felt heavier. Not darker, just fuller somehow. I made soup. I turned on the porch light early. I pulled the spare quilt from the closet and left it folded at the end of the bed. There was a storm forecast for the weekend. I wasn't worried. I had weathered worse, and I wasn't alone anymore. The wheels of justice were moving now. I could feel it, slow, deliberate, but unstoppable. Nora would face what she had done. And I would face what came next, not with fear, but with clarity. Because I knew who I was, and no one, not even my own daughter, could take that from me again. It started with a knock at their door. Not loud, not rushed, just 3 steady knocks around 7:15 in the morning. While the neighbors were still pulling on coats and sipping their first coffee, Jake opened the door, half-shaved, wearing one sock, and holding his phone like a shield. A tall man in a navy blazer introduced himself as Deputy Marshal Whitman and handed over a thick envelope. Jake didn't even read it right away. His eyes went straight to the gold badge clipped to the marshal's hip. By the time he finished scanning the document, Nora had come downstairs, her hair still damp from the shower. She took one look at Jake's face and froze. Then she turned to the marshal and asked if this meant they had to appear. The marshal didn't answer her. He just turned and left. Inside that envelope was more than a court summons. It was the beginning of a full-scale investigation. Financial records frozen, access to accounts restricted. The DA's office had reviewed the footage and the medical records and had authorized a joint task force to pursue the charges. That same afternoon, an investigator visited the hospital where the sedative prescription originated. Interviews followed. Paper trails uncovered. The doctor who had signed the order claimed he had been misled by a third party and failed to verify the identity of the patient. His license was suspended within days. By Friday, Jake's name was removed from the school board committee he had been so proud of. And Nora's nonprofit, which had once been the subject of a full-page feature in the community paper, was quietly taken off the city's partnership list. I didn't gloat, but I also didn't look away. I watched the fall with the same quiet precision I had used to plant tomatoes in the spring. Patient, intentional. At the grocery store, 2 women whispered near the produce aisle. I heard Nora's name. One of them shook her head slowly, holding a bag of lemons. The ripple had begun. Meanwhile, I continued living. I attended my book club, returned borrowed Pyrex dishes, mailed birthday cards to the women I'd met at the grief support group. But I didn't stop tracking the legal steps. Every form, every filing, every update from David came with a calm clarity that reminded me why I had chosen to act. This wasn't just about what they tried to do to me. It was about creating a line they could no longer cross. One night, as I was in bed, Martha called in a low, urgent tone. Jake had been spotted at a bar near the interstate, loud, slurring, talking too much. According to the bartender, he'd mentioned lawsuits and something about a safe deposit box. I didn't react. I simply went to my bedroom, opened my second drawer, and removed the document I had kept tucked beneath the quilted stationery. An old insurance file that had nothing to do with them, but shared the same bank branch listed on one of Nora's forged documents. A day later, I authorized David to request the bank's internal security footage, citing fraud. They complied. What we uncovered was staggering. Nora had visited the branch 3 weeks before my supposed signature had shown up on the care transfer papers. She hadn't come alone. She brought a man who looked enough like me from behind to pass on a grainy camera feed. They had approached a notary together. The notary, young and clearly distracted, had stamped a document without properly checking ID. It was all there, dated, logged, another brick in the wall. When David presented the footage to the assistant district attorney, her eyes narrowed. The case shifted. What began as a family betrayal now expanded into felony territory: theft, forgery, medical fraud, attempted elder abuse. And then the unexpected happened. Jake flipped. Faced with mounting charges and the threat of jail time, he turned on Nora. He signed a deposition, gave a full account of her role, how she had orchestrated the pill swap, how she had instructed him to download fake legal templates, how she had coached him on which words to use when talking to the doctor. His confession came with details only someone inside the plan could know. He even provided screenshots of old texts between them. The DA's office didn't need more, but they took it. I sat with David the morning we received the news. Nora would be indicted. A formal arrest. It was a heavy thing hearing it out loud. And yet it did not feel like victory. It felt like exhale. I remembered the way she used to braid her doll's hair at the foot of my bed when she couldn't sleep. How she once cried when I missed her piano recital because I had to work a double shift at the diner. Somewhere along the way, Something had hardened in her. And now the world was about to show her what it meant to be held accountable. The next day, Martha brought over lemon bars. She didn't say anything, just placed the tin on the counter and gave my hand a squeeze. I sat with that tin for a long time before opening it. I wasn't celebrating, but I also wasn't grieving. The truth had come into the light. And once truth begins to shine, it's hard to put it back into the dark. 2 days after Jake's confession reached the DA's desk, Nora filed an emergency motion through her attorney. It was slick, buried in procedural language, aimed at freezing all evidence tied to her nonprofit's accounts. She claimed everything was a misunderstanding, that she was the victim of a malicious smear campaign orchestrated by a bitter parent and an unstable husband. The court rejected it, but the media did not. The local paper ran a headline too big for its column. Respected youth advocate faces allegations of fraud and elder abuse. Her face was plastered beneath it, captured during some fundraising event, smiling in front of a line of schoolchildren. The comments came fast. Some defended her, citing years of service. Others called for her arrest. But the worst tone came from former staff. Anonymous quotes, quiet accusations. They spoke of missing funds, strange reimbursements, donors pulling back. And just like that, the storm she tried to hide behind swallowed her whole. At home, I stayed quiet. I didn't call anyone. I didn't respond to the handful of people who left messages saying they were sorry, that they had no idea. I didn't need their sympathy. I needed clarity. David met me at the diner down on Oak the following morning. He slid into the booth across from me, opened a slim manila folder, and showed me the latest deposition. It wasn't just Jake anymore. One of Nora's former assistants had stepped forward. She confirmed Nora had used the nonprofit's funds to cover personal expenses and had drafted false meeting notes to justify grant spending. Each line of testimony was like a rope pulling the curtain back. But I felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a growing heaviness. That afternoon, I sat by the window with a cup of lukewarm tea, watching the wind lift the corners of the garden tarp. I remembered planting flowers with Nora when she was a child. She had soft hands and too much curiosity. She once asked if daisies could hear when we spoke to them. Somewhere between that summer and this winter, something inside her had turned cold. The next day, I received a letter. Not official, not legal, just a plain white envelope with shaky handwriting. It was from Emily. She wrote that she had moved in with a friend's family, said she couldn't be near her parents right now, said she had seen the footage and had read the headlines. She didn't ask to come visit me. She didn't offer any apologies on her mother's behalf. She simply wrote, "I believe you, and I'm sorry." I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time, not crying, just breathing. That night, I locked every door. The next morning, there was a pounding on the back door. I stood still, holding my breath, heart steady. It was Nora. She looked thinner, eyes wild, hair pulled into a loose knot like she hadn't slept. I didn't open the door. She shouted my name twice, said she just needed to talk, that it had all gone too far. I turned away from the window and walked to the living room. I didn't want to hear it. But then I heard glass, the sound of a flower pot shattering. By the time I reached the porch, she was gone. And there beside the broken clay was a photograph. It was the one from our trip to Savannah, the last trip we ever took as mother and daughter. I picked it up. The corner was torn. Her smile in the picture looked forced. 2 nights later, a letter came from her attorney. A thinly veiled threat, demanding the withdrawal of all charges, claiming emotional coercion. David advised me not to respond. The DA's office sent a formal rejection. But I knew what this was. It wasn't a legal play. It was personal. She wanted me to feel something, regret, guilt, doubt. Instead, I felt steel. I had spent too many years wondering what I did wrong. I would not spend another second apologizing for surviving what she tried to do. The next Sunday, I sat at church. Not for the sermon, just for the stillness. Martha joined me, sat beside me in silence. After the service, she handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a photo frame. She had taken a screenshot of me from the news clip, the moment where I walked out of the courthouse, head high, spine straight. She said, "You should see yourself the way we all saw you that day." I thanked her. That night, I placed the frame beside my dresser mirror, not as a trophy, not as a warning, but as a reminder that sometimes survival is quiet. Sometimes it doesn't shout or break. Sometimes it just stands. And I had stood through all of it. The envelope came on a Thursday morning, hand-delivered by David with his tired smile and steady hands. He didn't sit, just stood there watching me open it at the kitchen table. I unfolded the letter, read the 2 short lines printed in elegant font. It was an invitation. Nora and Jake were hosting a family appreciation dinner at their country club. No signatures, no handwritten note, no apology. Just the bold presumption that I would show up. David waited for my reaction. His arms crossed lightly like he already knew what I was going to say. I set the letter down without a word, stood up, and walked to the cabinet near the stairs. I pulled out the navy blue folder I had kept sealed since the morning after the police raid. Inside were copies of the security footage, transcripts of Nora's conversations, testimonies, a full record of the forged prescriptions, the slush funds, and even the signed waiver where Jake admitted to the sedative swap. I handed the folder to David. "It's time," I said. He nodded once and left. No discussion, no explanation needed. Saturday night arrived. The club's parking lot was glowing under golden light. Expensive cars lined the front. A valet took mine without blinking when I pulled up in my dusty station wagon. Inside, the space buzzed with polite laughter, wine glasses clinking, and shallow conversations. I hadn't been to an event like this in years. But I wasn't here for nostalgia. A woman with a clipboard ushered me to my seat. I was alone at a table near the stage. Everyone else sat in clusters of 4 or 5, some whispering as they noticed my presence. I didn't return any greetings. Then Nora walked out, her hair curled tight, lips painted with something too red for her usual taste. She took the mic with the ease of someone used to applause. She spoke of legacy, of family, of giving back. Jake stood beside her, nodding like a bobblehead. And just as she reached the line about honoring the women who raised us, the ballroom doors opened. 2 plainclothed officers stepped inside. They didn't shout. They didn't rush. They moved with the calm certainty of people who knew exactly what they were walking into. One of them approached Jake. The other walked straight to Nora. It happened so fast that most guests didn't even register what was going on until the bracelets clicked. A ripple of confusion, gasps, a few shrieks. Nora's voice cracked. She asked what this was. Jake's face turned a shade I can only describe as empty. The officers didn't explain anything to the crowd. They simply led them out quietly, firmly. I remained seated. I didn't need to follow. I had already seen this scene play out in my mind a dozen times. But then something happened. Emily walked out from the back of the room. She had been hiding behind the curtain near the service entrance. She didn't look at me. She just stood there watching her parents being escorted through the side doors. She didn't cry. She didn't run after them. Instead, she turned to the crowd and said, "My grandmother saved me." Then she walked toward me and sat down. Silence settled over the room like fog. No one clapped. No one whispered. Just silence. 2 days later, I signed the final set of papers at David's office. The trust was officially transferred. My winnings, minus what I kept for living comfortably, were now in the name of the Franklin Fund, a nonprofit created in honor of my mother's name. Its mission was simple: to provide legal and emotional support to elderly individuals facing abuse, neglect, or coercion from their own families. I didn't need the recognition. I didn't need a plaque. But when the first call came through from a woman named Sylvia, who had been locked out of her own home after signing over her pension, I knew I had made the right choice. Later that month, I sat with Martha on the porch. She asked me if I felt better. I didn't answer. I just looked out at the garden. The daffodils were blooming again, the ones Nora once planted with her tiny hands. I no longer needed to understand what went wrong. I just needed to know I had done what was right. The hallway outside the visitation room smelled of antiseptic and artificial lemon. Somewhere down the corridor, a cart rolled by with a soft squeak. I sat on the bench waiting, a paper visitor tag clipped to my sweater. It was the same sweater I had worn the day Nora turned 10, the same one she once wrapped herself in after scraping her knee on the driveway. She said it smelled like home. The officer opened the door and gave me a short nod. I stood and stepped inside. The room was quiet, sterile, pale blue walls. A single table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs on either side. One chair was already occupied. Nora sat stiffly, her posture tight, her eyes unreadable. Her hands rested on the table, fingers laced together. She didn't look up when I entered. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat. No words, not yet. The silence between us wasn't hostile. It wasn't forgiving either. It was a silence that belonged to 2 people who had run out of excuses. Her eyes finally lifted. Not angry. Not broken. Just tired. I didn't think you'd come, she said. I nodded slowly. I did. She waited. Maybe for an accusation. Maybe for comfort. I gave her neither. You planned the dinner weeks before you sent the invitation, I said evenly. You wanted me surrounded, outnumbered, pressured. She blinked but didn't deny it. You expected me to fold, to sign over the trust, to disappear quietly. Nora's lips pressed into a thin line. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. It wasn't about the money. I let that sit for a moment. Then I leaned forward. Then what was it about? She glanced at the wall, then back to me. You always made me feel like I had to be perfect. Like everything I did was a performance. You praised me for grades, for achievements, for being strong, but never for being me. I exhaled, not because it hurt, but because it was something I had waited years to hear. You're right, I said. I was hard on you. I wanted you to be capable, independent, safe in a world that wouldn't hand you anything. I didn't know how to love gently. Her shoulders dropped slightly. So I turned hard too. I married someone like Jake because he knew how to play strong. But we were just two people trying to stay ahead of the fear. I know, I said. And I let that go on too long. She looked down at her hands, picking at her thumbnail. I didn't mean to hurt you that night. With the pills. With what I said. You didn't mean it, I said. But you let it happen, and you kept letting it happen. She didn't answer. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my coat pocket and laid it on the table between us. Her name was typed on the top. It was a handwritten letter, not mine. Emily's? I had found it tucked under my door the night before. Nora hesitated before picking it up. Her eyes moved quickly down the page. I watched her face shift. Confusion, then something close to shame. She's been seeing a therapist, I said. She wrote that on her own. Said she wants to see you, but not until you've done the work. Nora folded the letter again, carefully, like it was something fragile. I don't know if I can fix this, she whispered. You don't have to fix it all today, I said. But you do have to begin. For the first time since I walked in, her eyes met mine with something that resembled who she used to be. The girl who built forts in the backyard. The girl who begged for midnight pancakes. The girl who once cried because a bird flew into our window and died. I stood slowly. I'm not here to punish you, Nora. The court will do that part. I came because you're still my daughter, and because I needed to say this face to face. She nodded once, stiff and small. I moved to the door. Just before I knocked for the guard, I turned back. I forgive you, I said. She didn't say anything, but her lips trembled. And as the door opened behind me, I saw her clutching Emily's letter like it was the only real thing in the room. I stepped into the cold air outside. The wind was sharp but clean. Martha was waiting in the car, reading a book with her glasses pushed halfway down her nose. She didn't ask how it went, just offered me a thermos of hot tea and turned on the heater. We drove in silence for a while, the city slowly unfolding into distance. At a stoplight, I looked over at her. Do you think she meant it? Martha didn't answer immediately. Then she said, sometimes the first sorry is the one they say to themselves. I watched the traffic move past us. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel hollow either. I felt done. Not with being a mother, not with being hurt, but with carrying it all alone. And maybe that was enough for now. It was quiet in the house again. Not the kind of silence that once pressed heavy against my chest. Not the silence that came with waiting for footsteps that never arrived, or phone calls that always came with expectation. Not love. This was a new kind of quiet, a gentle one. A silence with space to breathe. I had started waking up without the knot in my stomach. It didn't happen all at once. It crept in day by day as I cleared the clutter from my kitchen, as I replaced the old curtains in the living room, as I planted marigolds by the porch and watched them bloom. There was peace in the doing. Some mornings I sat out with a cup of tea wrapped in the same shawl I had worn on Emily's first day of kindergarten. That morning felt like another lifetime. But the warmth in my chest as I remembered her tiny hand waving from the school bus window stayed with me. Emily hadn't come to visit yet, but she called. Not every day, but enough. Her voice was soft and sometimes uncertain, like she didn't quite know how to talk to me without Nora translating. But it was her. And that was more than enough for now. She told me she was writing short stories, mostly about animals that could talk. She said one of them was based on a grandmother fox who lived in a cave full of books and could see people's thoughts. I asked her if that fox ever got lonely. She was quiet, then said, Not really, because the fox had learned to enjoy her own company. I smiled at that. Martha had become more than just a neighbor. She had become a rhythm in my week: Tuesday morning walks, Friday lunches at the corner cafe, and Sunday evenings watching the old black and white movies I never had time for before. One afternoon, I helped her repaint the fence around her vegetable garden. We didn't talk much that day, just the sound of the brush moving along the wood, the occasional scrape of a chair, the sun climbing across our backs. It was ordinary. But it was the kind of ordinary I had once thought was gone for good. I had also started volunteering at the small thrift bookstore downtown, just a few hours a week, mostly sorting donations, sometimes helping older customers find large print titles. The first time I walked through the back door, the scent of paper and dust settled over me like an old quilt. I hadn't realized how much I missed being useful in a space that wasn't tied to survival. There was a woman there named Judith, in her late 60s, sharp-witted and always wearing earrings the size of walnuts. She didn't cry. She just welcomed me with a kind of unspoken knowing. We didn't talk about our pasts, but somehow we understood each other. And that was a kind of intimacy I hadn't had in years. One evening, as we were closing up, she handed me a slim book of poetry. Said it reminded her of me. I took it home and read the whole thing in one sitting. One line stayed with me longer than the rest. Some wounds don't close because they were never meant to. They grow into doors. That night I didn't cry. But I sat up in bed, hand on my chest, breathing slow. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was remembering. And that was a different kind of ache, one I could live with. I didn't miss Nora the way I thought I would. I missed the idea of her, the version of her that existed when she was 7 and tried to make pancakes for my birthday, burning every single one. I missed the sound of her laugh when she read silly books out loud. But the woman she had become had no place in my life now. At least not yet. Maybe not ever. And that was okay. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't waiting. I wasn't planning escape routes in my own home. I wasn't second-guessing the names of pills or locking away papers in hidden drawers. I was just living fully, quietly, steadily. There was still work to be done on myself, on what I wanted the rest of my years to look like. But I was no longer running from the question. I was walking straight into it. And the path, while unfamiliar, didn't scare me anymore. I stood by the lake that morning, letting the sun kiss the back of my neck. The same lake I used to bring Emily to when she was little, back when her giggles could echo off the water and I believed family was something solid, unshakable. Now the lake felt like mine again. The breeze carried the scent of pine and something faintly sweet. Maybe the lilacs that had bloomed early this year. It reminded me that life always kept growing, even after winter had its way. 2 weeks had passed since the final court date. Nora had pleaded guilty to elder abuse, fraud, and attempted coercion. Her sentence wasn't long, but the damage to her public image was swift and absolute. Her company dropped her. Her name had been quietly removed from 2 nonprofit boards. There was no speech from her, no apology, only silence. Jake took a different route. His family had hired a lawyer who begged for leniency, citing stress, poor judgment, temporary mental strain. It didn't help. He faced charges too, though less severe. But his medical license was suspended. His future uncertain. And that was enough for me. I never wanted to destroy them. I just wanted them to stop destroying me. The estate was officially transferred back to my name. The house, the land, every document Nora had tried to reroute behind my back. All of it was mine again, legally and visibly. But I didn't celebrate with champagne or parties. I took a walk around the property, touched the old maple tree by the gate, and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was still holding. The cameras had been removed from my home. Not because I was no longer cautious, but because I no longer felt watched. I no longer lived in fear of the knock on the door or the smile that came with too much sweetness and too many strings attached. Martha visited more often. She brought banana bread this time, still warm. We sat in my kitchen not saying much. Just 2 women who had seen enough of life to know when silence meant comfort. Emily started sending letters, handwritten ones. She said she liked the feel of a pen on paper better than a screen. Sometimes she included little sketches, a fox in glasses, a cup of tea with steam hearts. I kept them all in a wooden box on my nightstand. I hadn't replied yet. I wasn't ready, but each envelope brought something tender back into my chest. A warmth I hadn't expected to feel again. And I knew eventually I would write her back. There's a kind of healing that doesn't announce itself. No grand moments, just quiet evidence. I noticed it when I laughed at an old sitcom rerun, when I found myself humming while folding laundry, when I bought a new scarf because I liked the color, not because I needed it. That was the real victory. Not the court ruling, not the reclaimed house, but the return of joy in the small, unexpected places. One evening, I took out the winning lottery ticket. I hadn't told anyone, not even Martha, not even Emily. I kept it in a small ceramic jar behind my bookshelf. I didn't need the money anymore to feel safe, but I had plans for it now. The following week, I opened a fund in honor of my mother, a woman who had raised 4 children on a factory wage and still managed to read me bedtime stories every night. The fund would support single women over 60 pursuing community education, small businesses, or simply learning how to rebuild a life alone. I named it the Second Bloom Fund because that's what this season of life had become for me, a second bloom. On the morning of the launch, I wore a navy blue dress and pinned a small silver brooch to the collar. It had belonged to my grandmother. The auditorium wasn't full, but it didn't need to be. The right people were there. Women with soft eyes and strong backs. Women who nodded slowly when I spoke. Women who understood. When I stepped off the stage, I didn't look for Nora in the crowd. I didn't need to. This moment wasn't about her. It was about me, about what I had survived, about what I was still becoming. That night, as I settled into bed, the wind picked up outside. The trees whispered against the windows like an old friend. I reached over and turned off the lamp, then lay in the dark with a steady heartbeat and a quiet mind. I was no longer someone's mother, no longer someone's victim. I was just me, and that was more than enough. If you've ever been quietly erased by the people you once trusted most, I hope this story gave you a sense of clarity and power. Sometimes justice doesn't come through shouting, but through planning, patience, and knowing your worth. If you've ever felt unseen, I see you. And if you've ever found the courage to rebuild after betrayal, I honor you. Have you ever faced something like this? A betrayal that shifted your entire world? How did you find your way back? Tell me what you think in the comments. I really want to know. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.